Commander Jake Morrison stood in the vast chamber of the Galactic Council, his heart beating fast as he looked up at the towering alien beings that surrounded him. The chamber was huge, with walls that seemed to stretch forever upward, and the air hummed with the strange sounds of a dozen different alien languages being whispered at once. Jake had dreamed of this moment for years, ever since Earth first made contact with the galactic community 30 years ago. Today was supposed to be the day that humanity finally joined the Galactic Council as full members. Beside him stood Lisa Carter, Earth's best diplomat, her hands folded neatly in front of her as she waited for the proceedings to begin. On his other side was Dr. Ryan Hughes, a brilliant scientist who had spent the last decade working with alien researchers to share human knowledge and learn from the advanced civilizations that made up the council. All three humans wore their best formal uniforms, dark blue with gold trim, representing the United Earth government with pride and hope. The chamber itself was a marvel of alien engineering. The floor was made of some kind of crystal that seemed to glow with its own inner light, and the walls were covered in symbols from hundreds of different worlds and species. High above them, in elevated seats that formed a great circle around the central floor where the humans stood, sat the representatives of 43 different alien civilizations. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange that Jake had trouble understanding how they could even exist. The Vorthic delegation sat directly in front of them, their serpentine bodies coiled in their special chairs, their scales gleaming under the chamber's strange lighting. Chancellor Zeth Kar, their leader, was massive even by Vorthic standards, his head the size of a small car and his eyes like burning coals. To the left were the Axiom Collective, beings made entirely of living crystal who communicated through colors that flashed across their surfaces like lightning. On the right sat the Hegemony representatives, proud warrior beings who looked like they were carved from stone, their faces showing no emotion as they watched the proceedings. Jake tried to stay calm as the ceremonial opening began. A low, haunting sound filled the chamber as the council's ancient rituals were performed. Lights danced across the walls, showing the history of the Galactic Council and all the species that had joined over the thousands of years since its founding. Jake felt a surge of pride as he thought about how far humanity had come from a single world to a species ready to take its place among the stars. The formal presentation began with Lisa Carter stepping forward to address the council. Her voice was clear and strong as she spoke about humanity's achievements, their contributions to galactic peace, and their desire to join the great community of civilized worlds. She talked about the technology humans had shared, the diseases they had helped cure on alien worlds, and the conflicts they had helped resolve through diplomacy rather than war. Dr. Hughes followed with a detailed report on the scientific advances that human researchers had made possible through cooperation with alien scientists. Jake listened with growing confidence as his colleagues made their case. Everything they said was true. Humanity had proven itself again and again over the past 3 decades. They had shown that they could be trusted, that they were peaceful, and that they had much to offer the galactic community. Human ships had helped to defend Council worlds from raiders. Human doctors had saved alien lives. Human engineers had helped build the great space stations that connected the galaxy. But as the presentations continued, Jake began to notice something that made his stomach tighten with worry. The alien representatives were not reacting the way he had expected. There were no nods of approval, no signs of welcome or acceptance. Instead, he saw cold stares and what looked almost like fear in some of their strange eyes. The Vorthic chancellors' tail was twitching in a way that Jake had learned meant anger or agitation. The crystal beings of the Axiom Collective were flashing colors that he remembered from his briefings meant disagreement or rejection. When the human presentations were finished, Chancellor Zeth Kar rose to his full, terrifying height. His voice was like the sound of grinding stone as he began to speak, and every word hit Jake like a physical blow. The Chancellor did not welcome humanity to the Council. Instead, he spoke of danger and threat. He called humans unpredictable and violent. He said that their rapid technological advancement was suspicious, and their military capabilities were too great for a species. So other council members began to speak, and each speech was worse than the last. The hegemony representative, a being called War Commander Thoktar, stood and declared that humans were natural warriors who would upset the balance of galactic power. The representative from the ethereal communion, floating beings who were supposed to be wise and peaceful, spoke of disturbing readings they claimed to have detected from human minds, suggesting that humans were capable of violence on a scale that threatened all civilized life. Jake felt his world crashing down around him as species after species rose to speak against humanity. They talked about human history, about the wars that had torn Earth apart before first contact. They mentioned human expansion into space and the speed with which humans had colonized new worlds. They even brought up human fiction, claiming that the stories humans told about conquest and war revealed their true nature. The worst betrayal came when the others Council presented evidence that they had been studying humanity in secret for years. They had intercepted human communications, analyzed human military exercises, and even placed hidden observers on human worlds. They had never intended to accept humanity as members. Instead, they had been gathering intelligence, learning about human strengths and weaknesses, preparing for what they now claimed was inevitable conflict. Dr. Hughes stepped forward, his face pale with shock and anger, to protest that humanity had shared their knowledge freely and honestly. He reminded the Council of the medical advances that had saved millions of alien lives, of the peaceful exploratory missions that humans had conducted, of the countless acts of cooperation and friendship that had marked human-alien relations. But his words fell on deaf ears. The Council had already made its decision. Chancellor Zethkar announced the final verdict with cold satisfaction. Humanity was declared a threat to galactic peace and stability. All human ships were ordered to return to Earth immediately. All human colonies outside the Sol system were to be evacuated within one standard galactic year. Humanity was to be contained within their home system, and any attempt to expand beyond those boundaries would be met with force. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien sounds as the verdict was announced. Some species seemed pleased with the decision, while others appeared uncomfortable, but unwilling to speak against the majority. Jake stood frozen in shock, unable to believe what he was hearing. 30 years of peaceful contact, of cooperation and friendship, had been thrown away in a single moment. Lisa Carter was the first to recover, her diplomat's training kicking in as she began to protest the decision and demand explanations. But it was too late. Council security forces, tall insectoid beings with multiple arms and compound eyes, were already moving toward the human delegation. The message was clear. The humans were no longer welcome in the chamber. As they were escorted from the Great Hall, Jake caught sight of Admiral Kate Sullivan on his communicator, her face grim as she reported that council ships were already moving to surround the human fleet in orbit around Nexus Prime. The trap had been perfectly laid. While the humans had been in the chamber, believing they were about to join the galactic community, alien warships had been getting into position to ensure they could not escape to warn Earth of what was coming. The last thing Jake saw as they were forced from the chamber was Chancellor Zethkar's satisfied smile, and he realized with growing horror that this had all been planned from the very beginning. The Galactic Council had never intended to accept humanity. They had lured Earth's best and brightest to Nexus Prime not to welcome them, but to eliminate them and leave humanity leaderless for what was about to come. The betrayal was complete, and Jake knew that everything was about to change forever. 6 months had passed since the betrayal at Nexus Prime, and Captain Ben Rodriguez stood on the command deck of New Colorado's defense station, watching 3 massive alien fleets approach his small mining colony through the darkness of space. The warning had come just hours ago through secret channels that Jake Morrison and the other survivors had managed to establish after their escape from the Galactic Council. Operation Cleansing Light had begun, and New Colorado was one of the first targets. Ben was not a military man by training. He had been a mining engineer before the crisis started, responsible for the safety of the 10,000 colonists who called New Colorado home. But when the Council's intentions became clear, every human settlement had been forced to organize defenses with whatever resources they had available. Ben had been chosen to lead because he knew the colony better than anyone, and because he was one of the few people who had any experience with weapons systems from his time in Earth's merchant marine. The approaching fleets were a terrifying sight. The lead ships belonged to the hegemony, massive wedge-shaped vessels that looked like they had been carved from dark stone, bristling with weapon ports and armor plating that could withstand almost anything humans could throw at them. Behind them came the sleek, curved ships of the Axiom Collective, their crystal hulls glowing with deadly energy. The third fleet was made up of Vorthik vessels, long and sinuous like their creators, designed to strike fast and disappear before their enemies could respond. Amy Walsh, the colony's chief engineer, hurried onto the command deck with a data pad in her hands and worry written across her face. She had been working around the clock for the past 6 months to turn New Colorado's mining equipment into weapons and defensive systems. The mining lasers had been reconfigured as anti-ship batteries. The cargo haulers had been fitted with missile pods, and the asteroid processing plants had been converted to produce ammunition and repair parts. Amy quickly briefed Ben on the colony's defensive preparations. They had managed to hide most of the civilian population in the deep mining tunnels that ran through the asteroids surrounding New Colorado. The children and elderly were already 3 kilometers underground, protected by solid rock and shielded from sensors. The remaining colonists, about 2,000 people, had volunteered to stay and fight despite having no real military training. On Earth, President Helen Brooks was coordinating humanity's desperate response to the Council's assault. The secret communication network that had been established after Nexus Prime was buzzing with reports from human colonies across the galaxy. Some settlements were already under attack. Others were reporting Council ships approaching, and a few had gone silent entirely. The pattern was clear. The aliens intended to wipe out every human presence beyond Earth's solar system. Fleet Admiral Tony Garcia commanded Earth's space fleet from his headquarters on Luna, but his forces were spread thin across dozens of star systems. The human fleet was advanced by Earth standards, but it was tiny compared to the combined might of the Galactic Council. Every ship was precious, and Garcia knew that he could not save every colony. The best he could do was try to evacuate as many people as possible and prepare Earth's defenses for the inevitable assault that would come once the outer colonies fell. Lieutenant Commander Sam Phillips was working frantically in Earth's intelligence center, trying to piece together the scope of the Council's operation from the fragments of information that were reaching them. What he was discovering made his blood run cold. The aliens had not just been planning this attack for months. They had been preparing for years. Every piece of technology that humans had shared, every act of cooperation and friendship, had been studied and analyzed to find weaknesses that could be exploited. The attack on New Colorado began at dawn, colony time. The hegemony ships opened fire first, their massive beam weapons reaching across space to strike the colony's outer defenses. The shields that Amy Walsh had jury-rigged from mining equipment held for a few seconds before failing, and the first explosions lit up the asteroid field like deadly fireworks. Ben Rodriguez found himself commanding a battle he had never been trained to fight, making decisions that would determine whether his people lived or died. The colonists fought with a desperation that surprised their attackers. Human mining equipment, never designed for war, was used in ways that the alien tacticians had not anticipated. Cargo haulers loaded with explosives rammed into council ships, trading their lives for the chance to damage the enemy. Mining charges were detonated in coordinated patterns that turned asteroid fields into deadly obstacle courses for the approaching fleets. Dr. Claire Mitchell, New Colorado xenobiologist, made a discovery during the battle that would prove crucial to humanity's survival. While analyzing wreckage from a damaged Axiom collective ship, she found that the crystal beings had a fatal weakness. They were vulnerable to certain frequencies of electromagnetic radiation that humans used routinely in their mining operations. The discovery was immediately transmitted to other human colonies and to Earth, giving humanity its first real weapon against their enemies. The battle for New Colorado lasted 3 days. Ben Rodriguez and his defenders fought from position to position, using their knowledge of the asteroid field to ambush alien landing parties and destroy council ships that ventured too close to the colony's hidden defensive positions. Amy Walsh kept the improvised weapon systems running with spare parts and determination, while the civilian volunteers showed courage that amazed even themselves. But courage alone was not enough to overcome the overwhelming odds. On the third day, with their ammunition running low and their defenses crumbling, Ben Rodriguez made the hardest decision of his life. He ordered the final evacuation of New Colorado, sending the last transport ships toward Earth, while he and a handful of volunteers stayed behind to buy them time. The end came quickly after that. The remaining defenders triggered the mining charges that Amy Walsh had planted throughout the colony's core, turning New Colorado itself into a massive bomb. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away, and when the light faded, both the human colony and a significant portion of the attacking Council fleet had been destroyed. News of New Colorado's fate reached Earth within hours, carried by the survivors who had escaped in the final evacuation. The loss was devastating, but it also sent a message that the Galactic Council had not expected. Humans would not surrender quietly. They would fight for every colony, every ship, every life, and they would make their enemies pay a price that the aliens had not anticipated. President Brooks addressed the nation and the scattered human colonies that night, her voice steady despite the grief in her heart. She spoke of New Colorado's sacrifice and promised that it would not be forgotten. She announced Protocol Exodus, the plan to scatter humanity across unknown regions of space where the Council could not find them. And she made a promise that would define humanity's response to the betrayal. For every human life taken, the aliens would pay tenfold. Admiral Garcia received new orders that night, orders that marked the beginning of humanity's transformation from peaceful colonists to galactic warriors. The human fleet would no longer focus on defending fixed positions that could be overwhelmed by superior numbers. Instead, they would become mobile, striking at Council targets and disappearing before the aliens could respond. The hunt had begun. But the Galactic Council was about to learn that they were not the only predators in the galaxy, that the survivors of New Colorado were scattered among other human settlements, carrying with them the knowledge that Ben Rodriguez and his people had died for. Dr. Mitchell's discovery about alien weaknesses was already being studied by human scientists across the galaxy. Amy Walsh's innovations in converting civilian equipment to military use were being copied and improved upon by engineers on a dozen worlds. The Galactic Council had won the first battles of their war against humanity, but they had also awakened something that they did not understand. Humans were adaptable in ways that the aliens could not comprehend. They learned from every defeat, grew stronger from every loss, and became more dangerous with every passing day. The Council had expected to face a primitive species that would collapse under the first serious assault. Instead, they had created an enemy that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. 2 years had passed since the betrayal, and Commander Nick Thompson moved silently through the abandoned Vorthak research station, his team following close behind in the artificial darkness they had created by cutting the facility's power systems. The station hung in the void of the Kepler Nebula, hidden from Council sensors by the same electromagnetic interference that concealed the human mobile base that Nick called home. This was what humanity had become. Shadows in the dark, striking. From hiding and vanishing before their enemies could respond. Nick's team consisted of the best that humanity had to offer in their new reality. Sergeant Kelly Brooks was a demolitions expert who could turn anything into a weapon, her small frame hiding a brilliant mind that saw explosive potential in the most ordinary objects. Lieutenant Chris Edwards was their infiltration specialist, a man who could slip through alien security systems as easily as walking through an open door. All three of them had been changed by 2 years of constant warfare, their faces hard and their eyes cold in ways that would have shocked the peaceful humans who had first approached the Galactic Council. The human mobile base where Nick's team operated was hidden deep in the nebula, a massive structure built from salvaged alien ships and human ingenuity. It had no name because names could be intercepted by enemy communications, and it had no fixed location because staying in one place meant death. The base drifted through the nebula like a ghost ship, its hull covered in stealth plating that made it invisible to most sensors, and its interior filled with the constant hum of activity as thousands of humans worked to turn their exile into a weapon. Dr. Alex Morgan ran the base's research division from a laboratory that had been carved out of a captured hegemony cruiser, the alien vessel's original purpose completely transformed by human creativity. Where once the ship had carried weapons designed to destroy human colonies, it now housed equipment that turned Council technology against its creators. Alex had not slept more than 4 hours at a time in the past year, driven by a fury that burned in every human heart since the betrayal. His team had made breakthroughs that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Advances born from desperation and hatred. The transformation of humanity was visible everywhere on the base. Children who had been evacuated from destroyed colonies now learned mathematics by calculating missile trajectories and studied biology by understanding alien weaknesses. Teenagers like 15-year-old Maria Santos served as communications operators and sensor technicians, their young minds, adapting to their new reality with a flexibility that amazed and sometimes frightened the adults around them. These children had never known peace, and they viewed the galaxy not as a community to join, but as an enemy to defeat. Dr. Lavra Kane worked alongside Alex Morgan in the research labs. Her expertise in biology focused entirely on finding new ways to harm the species that had betrayed humanity. She had developed toxins specifically designed to affect Vorthic nervous systems, viruses that could disrupt axiom collective energy patterns, and pheromone disruptors that could throw hegemony military units into chaos. Her work was a dark mirror of the medical advances that humans had once shared freely with their alien neighbors. The raid on the Vorthic research station was typical of the Mincor, operations that Nick Thompson's team conducted almost weekly. Council facilities across the galaxy had learned to fear the silent approach of human strike teams, but they could never predict where the next attack would come. The humans had abandoned the predictable patterns of conventional warfare in favor of chaos and terror, striking at targets that seemed random but were actually chosen to cause maximum psychological damage to their enemies. Kelly Brooks moved through the research station's corridors with practiced efficiency, placing explosive charges at key structural points, while Chris Edwards accessed the facility's computer systems to steal valuable intelligence. The Vorthics who had worked here were dead, killed in their sleep by nerve gas that Lavra Kane had specifically designed to be undetectable by their sensors. The humans no longer took prisoners when they could avoid it, and they no longer worried about the moral implications of their actions. The intelligence that Chris Edwards discovered in the station's computers was more valuable than they had hoped. The files contained detailed plans for the next phase of Operation Cleansing Light, including the locations of human settlements that the Council believed were still hidden and the timetables for attacks that were scheduled to begin within days. More importantly, the files revealed the location of a major Council supply depot that was crucial to their military operations in this sector of the galaxy. Nick Thompson transmitted the intelligence back to the mobile base using encrypted communications that changed frequency every few seconds, a system that human cryptographers had developed after learning that the Council had been intercepting their messages for years. The response came back within minutes. Captain Steve Walsh would lead a major assault on the supply depot, while Nick's team was to proceed to the human settlement at Haven Colony to assist with their evacuation before the planned Council attack. Mobile Base erupted into activity as the new intelligence was analyzed and plans were made. Admiral Carl Johnson commanded the base's small fleet of captured and converted alien ships, vessels that looked like they belonged to the Council but carried human crews and human weapons. His ships could move through Council space without being challenged, allowing them to strike at targets that thought they were safe behind friendly lines. Captain Steve Walsh prepared for what would be the largest human military operation since the war began. His target was a massive Council supply depot in the Centauri system, a facility that provided ammunition and spare parts to a dozen different fleets. The depot was heavily defended by 3 different species and was considered impregnable by Council military planners. But human military doctrine had evolved far beyond what the aliens expected, and Steve's plan relied on tactics that no civilized species would consider using. The assault on the supply depot began with a series of simultaneous attacks on Council facilities across 50 different star systems. Human strike teams emerged from hiding to hit targets that ranged from communication relays to fuel refineries, creating the impression of a massive coordinated offensive that stretched Council defenses to their breaking point, while alien commanders scrambled to respond to dozens of different threats. Steve Walsh's main force approached their real target undetected. The battle for the supply depot lasted only 6 hours, but it changed the nature of the war. Human forces used captured Council identification codes to approach without being challenged, then unleashed weapons that their enemies had never seen before. Fusion charges turned the depot's own stored ammunition into massive explosions that could be seen from neighboring star systems. Boarding parties used biological weapons to disable the facility's defenders before they could mount an effective resistance. But the most significant aspect of the battle was what happened after the fighting ended. For the first time since the war began, the humans did not simply destroy their target and disappear. Instead, they captured the facility and everyone in it, taking prisoners and seizing intact alien technology that could be studied and reverse engineered. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer content to simply survive the Council's aggression. They were adapting, learning, and growing stronger with every engagement. The captured Council personnel were transferred to secure facilities on the mobile base, where they became subjects for study by human scientists who had abandoned their former ethical constraints. Dr. Morgan's research teams learned more about alien psychology and physiology in the weeks following the depot raid than they had discovered in years of peaceful cooperation. The knowledge gained from these studies would prove crucial in developing new weapons and tactics for future operations. Maria Santos and the other young humans on the base watched the prisoners with cold curiosity. These alien beings who had once seemed so advanced and powerful now reduced to subjects for experimentation. The children asked questions about alien biology and psychology with the same detached interest that previous generations had shown when studying insects or laboratory animals. The transformation of human society was complete. They had become something that their former selves would not have recognized. The success of the supply depot raid sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council. Species that had supported the war against humanity began to question whether they had made a terrible mistake. The Axiom Collective withdrew 2 of their fleets from offensive operations to defend their home systems. The hegemony demanded additional resources to replace the losses they had suffered. Chancellor Zeeth Kar found himself facing challenges to his leadership as other Vorthic leaders questioned the wisdom of continuing a war that was becoming more costly with each passing month. Nick Thompson returned to the mobile base after successfully evacuating Haven Colony, bringing with him another 1,000 human refugees who would soon be integrated into the growing war machine that humanity had become. As he watched the new arrivals being processed and assigned to various duties, he reflected on how much had changed since the betrayal at Nexus Prime. 3 years after the betrayal, General Rick Patterson stood on the bridge of his flagship, a massive hegemony dreadnought that had been captured and completely rebuilt with human technology. The ship's original name had been removed and replaced with simple identification numbers because humanity no longer had time for ceremony or tradition. What mattered now was function, efficiency, and the ability to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies across the galaxy. The dreadnought served as the command center for the largest human military operation in history. 50 battle groups, each consisting of captured and converted alien ships crewed by humans who had learned to fight with a brutality that shocked even themselves, were positioned throughout Council space. Today they would launch simultaneous attacks on targets across 300 star systems, turning the galaxy into a battlefield where nowhere was safe from human retaliation. Colonel Dana Miller commanded one of those battle groups from her position, aboard a converted Vorthic cruiser. She had been a logistics officer before the war, responsible for managing supply lines and transportation schedules. Now she planned operations that left entire alien worlds without power, water, or communications. The transformation that had overtaken humanity was visible in her cold eyes, in the casual way she discussed the deaths of millions of alien civilians as acceptable. Collateral damage. Captain Joe Anderson led another battle group from a ship that had originally belonged to the Axiom Collective. Its crystal structure, now reinforced with human armor and fitted with weapons that could punch through any defense the Council possessed. Joe had lost his family when the aliens destroyed the colony at New Terra, and he carried that loss with him into every battle. His crews knew that he would never accept surrender from their enemies, and they had learned to match his ruthlessness in combat. The coordinated assault began at exactly the same moment across the galaxy. Time to overwhelm Council communications and prevent any effective response. Human forces struck at power generation facilities, destroying the infrastructure that kept alien worlds habitable. They targeted communication networks, cutting off entire star systems from contact with their governments. They hit transportation hubs, stranding alien military units far from their bases and supplies. But the psychological warfare was even more devastating than the physical attacks. Human infiltration teams had spent months preparing for this day, placing agents in key positions throughout Council space. Agent Lisa Turner had managed to infiltrate the Vorthic Intelligence Service, where she had access to classified communications between alien military leaders. Her reports revealed the growing panic among Council species as they realized that humanity had evolved far beyond what they had expected. Specialist Mark Kelly led a team of saboteurs who had penetrated deep into hegemony space, where they had been preparing for months to strike at targets that the aliens believed were completely secure. When the coordinated assault began, Mark's team was ready with explosives that turned the hegemony's main military academy into a crater visible from orbit. The message was clear. No alien institution was safe from human vengeance. The Galactic Council's unity began to fracture under the pressure of the human assault. The depth swimmers, an aquatic species that had supported the war from the beginning, suddenly found their water worlds contaminated with toxins that made them uninhabitable. Dr. Lara, Kane's biological weapons had been specifically designed to target their unique physiology, and within days entire planets were being evacuated as their populations fled to safer regions of space. The hive clusters, insectoid beings who communicated through complex pheromone signals, discovered that humans had learned to disrupt their communication methods with devastating effectiveness. Human forces broadcast interfering chemicals into the atmosphere of hive worlds, causing mass confusion that made coordinated resistance impossible. Entire military units turned on each other as their ability to distinguish friend from enemy was destroyed by the invisible chemical warfare. Chancellor Zethkar of the Vorthik found himself facing challenges to his authority as species after species withdrew their support from the war effort. The ethereal communion, who had originally supported humanity's exclusion from the Council, now questioned whether they had made a terrible mistake. Their representatives spoke of disturbing visions that showed the galaxy consumed by endless war, with humanity emerging as the dominant species among the ruins of former civilizations. Dr. Patricia Davis had become humanity's chief intelligence officer, coordinating information gathering and psychological warfare operations from a hidden base in the Outer Rim. Her teams had intercepted communications that revealed the true scope of the Council's original plan for humanity. The aliens had not simply intended to contain humans within their home system. They had planned to gradually reduce Earth's population through engineered diseases and economic warfare, slowly exterminating the entire species while maintaining the pretense of civilized behavior. The revelation of the Council's genocidal intentions was broadcast across the galaxy through human propaganda networks that had been years in the making. Patricia's teams had recruited sympathetic aliens on dozens of worlds, beings who had grown disgusted with their government's increasingly authoritarian methods. These allies helped spread the truth about what the Council had planned, turning public opinion against the war and creating internal dissent within alien societies. The attack on Nexus, Prime's orbital defense network, marked the culmination of the human offensive. Admiral Susan Wright led a fleet of 30 captured ships in a direct assault on the symbol of Galactic Council power. The battle was broadcast live across human communication networks, showing the galaxy that the mighty Council could not even protect their own capital from human retaliation. The orbital defenses of Nexus Prime had been considered impregnable, protected by energy shields that could withstand the combined firepower of entire fleets. But human scientists had spent 3 years studying Council technology, learning its weaknesses and developing counters to every defensive system the aliens possessed. The shields fell within hours, and the defense stations were destroyed one by one as the galaxy watched in amazement. Susan Wright's ships did not simply destroy the defenses and leave. Instead, they remained in orbit around Nexus Prime for 3 days, demonstrating that humans could strike at the heart of Council space whenever they chose. A psychological impact was devastating. If the Council could not protect their own capital, how could they protect anyone else? A fracturing of the Galactic Council accelerated as species after species began seeking separate peace agreements with humanity. The quantum entities, beings of pure energy who had remained neutral throughout most of the war, offered to mediate between humans and the remaining Council members. But their offers were rejected by human leaders who had learned not to trust any alien promises. General Patterson coordinated the final phase of the human offensive from his flagship as it moved through Council space like an unstoppable force of nature. His battle groups had perfected the art of rapid deployment and overwhelming firepower, striking at targets with such speed and violence that resistance became impossible. The aliens who had once hunted humans through the galaxy now found themselves prey to an enemy that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. The war crimes tribunals that the Council had planned to use against captured humans were now being prepared for Council leaders who had orchestrated the attempted genocide. Human forces had captured detailed records of the original planning for Operation Cleansing Light, including communications that proved the alien leadership had knowingly ordered the extermination of an entire species. The evidence would ensure that no Council leader could claim ignorance of their crimes. Captain Joe Anderson's battle group struck the final blow against Council resistance when they destroyed the hegemony's main fleet base at Rigel Station. The base had been the center of military operations against humanity, and its destruction left the most militaristic Council species without the ability to continue organized resistance. The explosion was visible across 3 star systems, a funeral pyre for the alliance that had tried to destroy humanity. As the 4th year of war drew to a close, the galaxy had been transformed. The Galactic Council that had once ruled hundreds of worlds now controlled less than a dozen star systems. Their fleets were scattered or destroyed, their leaders were dead or in hiding, and their subject species had either fled to the galactic rim or surrendered to human forces. The hunters had indeed become the hunted, and the prey they had sought to destroy had evolved into the dominant predator in the galaxy. Rick Patterson looked out at the stars from his flagship's bridge and felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory. The aliens had taught humanity a valuable lesson about the true nature of galactic politics. Power was not granted by councils or earned through cooperation. It was taken by those strong enough to seize it and hold it against all challenges. Humanity had learned that lesson well, and they would never forget it again. 4 years had passed since the betrayal at Nexus Prime, and Fleet Admiral Greg Martinez stood at the center of the largest human armada that had ever been assembled, watching as the final remnants of the Galactic Council prepared for their last stand at Centauri Hub. The massive space station had once been a symbol of alien cooperation and unity, but now it served as the final refuge for the species that had tried to exterminate humanity. Today would mark the end of the war and the beginning of humanity's reign over the galaxy. The human fleet stretched across space for millions of kilometers, a collection of ships that told the story of humanity's transformation through warfare. Some vessels were original human designs, sleek and efficient warships that had been built in the hidden shipyards of the Outer Rim. Others were captured alien vessels that had been completely rebuilt with human technology, their original purposes forgotten as they served new masters. All of them carried crews that had been forged in the fires of 4 years of constant battle. Captain Angela Ross commanded one of the fleet's battle groups from her position aboard a ship that had once belonged to the Vorthic hegemony. She had been a merchant captain before the war, transporting goods between human colonies and building relationships with alien traders who had seemed like friends. Now she planned operations that would determine the fate of entire species, her decisions carrying weight that would echo through galactic history for generations to come. Colonel Pete Jackson had become a legend among human forces, his tactical brilliance earning him respect and fear throughout the galaxy. His reputation was built on victories that had seemed impossible, battles where human forces had defeated alien enemies with superior numbers and technology through cunning and ruthlessness that shocked even other humans. Pete's methods had evolved far beyond anything taught in military academies, incorporating psychological warfare and terror tactics that broke enemy morale before the fighting even began. The final diplomatic attempt came from an unexpected source. Zarathul of the Ethereal Communion approached the human fleet under a flag of truce. her crystalline form shimmering with the same ethereal light that had once fascinated human scientists. During the peaceful years of first contact, she represented the few council species that had opposed humanity's persecution from the beginning, aliens who had recognized the mistake their civilization was making, but had been powerless to prevent it. Ambassador Frank Mitchell met with Zarathol aboard. Neutral station at the edge of the battle zone, but the meeting was a formality that both sides knew would accomplish nothing. Frank had been a career diplomat before the war, skilled in the art of negotiation and compromise. But 4 years of genocide had changed him as much as it had changed every other human. The species that had once sought acceptance through peaceful means no longer existed. Zarathol spoke of regret and the possibility of coexistence, offering territorial concessions and reparations that would have seemed generous before the war began. She promised that the surviving council species would retreat to the galactic rim and never again interfere with human expansion. Her words carried the desperation of a civilization that had finally understood the magnitude of their mistake. But it was far too late for such gestures. Frank Mitchell listened to the aliens, pleased with the cold detachment that had become characteristic of human leadership. He spoke of the colonies that had been destroyed, the children who had died in council attacks, and the peaceful future that humanity had been denied by alien treachery. His response was simple and final. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, and no mercy for those who had chosen genocide as their solution to the human question. The final assault on Centauri Hub began with a bombardment that lit up the surrounding space like a new star. Human forces had spent months preparing for this moment, studying the station's defenses and developing weapons specifically designed to crack its massive armor and shield systems. The attack was not simply about military victory, but about sending a message that would be remembered by every species in the galaxy. General Kevin Martinez led the ground assault on the station, while his sister commanded the space battle from her flagship. The Martinez family had lost everything in the early days of the war when Council forces destroyed their home colony, but they had channeled their grief into a determination that made them among humanity's most effective military leaders. Kevin's troops fought through the station's corridors with a precision that came from years of experience in alien environments. The defenders of Centauri Hub fought with the desperation of beings who knew they were making their last stand. Vorthek warriors used their natural advantages in close combat, their serpentine bodies allowing them to move through the station's maintenance tunnels and strike at human forces from unexpected angles. Hegemony soldiers turned the station's corridors into fortified positions, using their knowledge of defensive warfare to make every meter cost the attackers dearly. But human forces had evolved beyond anything the aliens could comprehend. 4 years of constant warfare had taught them to fight in environments that ranged from the vacuum of space to the crushing depths of alien oceans. They used weapons that exploited every weakness that Dr. Claire Mitchell and her researchers had discovered, turning the aliens' own biology against them with ruthless efficiency. The Axiom Collective made their final attempt to negotiate during the battle itself, their crystal representatives flashing colors that represented concepts of surrender and submission. But humanity no longer recognized such concepts when applied to their enemies. The crystalline beings were shattered with sonic weapons that turned their unique physiology into a vulnerability. Their fragments scattered through the station's corridors like broken glass dot as the battle reached its climax. The true scope of human transformation became clear. The soldiers who fought through Centauri Hub were no longer the same species that had approached the Galactic Council with hopes of peaceful cooperation. They had become something harder and more dangerous, shaped by betrayal and genocide into a galaxy's dominant predator. Their victory was not just military, but evolutionary. The last resistance ended when Chancellor Zethkar himself was cornered in the station's command center, his massive form coiled in defeat as human soldiers surrounded him. The Vorthic leader who had orchestrated humanity's betrayal found himself face to face with Jake Morrison, the same human commander who had stood in the council chambers 4 years earlier, seeking acceptance and friendship. Jake had been changed. By the war as much as any human, his diplomat's instincts were replaced by the cold calculation of a military leader who had learned to measure success by the number of enemy dead. He looked at the alien who had destroyed humanity's dreams of galactic cooperation and felt no satisfaction in victory, only the grim determination to ensure that such betrayal could never happen again. The final moments of the Galactic Council came not with grand speeches or ceremonial surrenders, but with the simple reality of military defeat. Centauri Hub fell silent as its last defenders were eliminated, and the station that had once coordinated the governance of hundreds of worlds became another trophy in humanity's collection of conquered alien facilities. Commander Jake Morrison stood once again in a chamber filled with alien technology, but this time he was not a supplicant seeking acceptance. He was the representative of the galaxy's new dominant species, dictating terms to the survivors of civilizations that had tried to exterminate his people. The transformation was complete, and there could be no going back to what humanity had been before the betrayal. The surviving alien species scattered to the edges of known space, carrying with them stories of the humans who had refused to die quietly. Some fled to the galactic rim where they established hidden colonies, hoping to rebuild their civilizations far from human space. Others simply disappeared into the void between stars, becoming nomads who would spend generations searching for new homes in the unexplored regions of the galaxy. Humanity began the process of claiming their inheritance, establishing colonies on former council worlds and converting alien infrastructure to serve human needs. The galaxy that had rejected them as too dangerous was now theirs to rule as they saw fit. Children like Maria Santos, who had grown up knowing only war, now faced the challenge of building a civilization that could maintain the peace they had won through violence. The transformation of human society continued even after the fighting ended. The species that had once valued cooperation and peaceful exploration now governed through strength and the implied threat of overwhelming force. They had learned the lessons that the galaxy had taught them through betrayal and attempted genocide, and they would never again make the mistake of trusting in the goodwill of alien civilizations. Greg Martinez looked out at the stars from his flagship as the human fleet began its journey home to Earth, their victory complete, but their innocence lost forever. A galaxy was vast and full of wonders that humanity would now explore as conquerors rather than visitors. The Galactic Council had created the very threat they had tried to prevent, forging a species that would dominate the cosmos for millennia to come.